Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bear Business Vodcast with me, Chris Barnard from feedbackfans.com. Today my guest is founder of the software business Scopey, and we look at how their unique software can help your agency or brand solve that age-old problem of scope creep in projects. Jen, hi. Thank you for joining me on the next episode of Bear Business. Our topic today is one that I think probably keeps professional services people up at night, certainly responsible for more late nights than even vodka Red Bull, I would say, as our topic is scope creep and specifically your software Scopey and how it deals with scope creep. Can you just tell us a bit about your background and what inspired the creation of your software Scopey?
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'd love to tell you more about Scopey and scope creep. So I'm in Ireland now, but before Ireland, I was living in Melbourne, Australia, where I had my own digital design agency. So I ran that for 10 years with my co-founder. And scope creep was probably the biggest bottleneck to our business growth. It was probably causing us about 15% revenue loss per project, sometimes a lot more on larger projects. And apart from that, just the stress of managing scopes of work with clients, and change requests, figuring out what was in and out of scope. That was very stressful, and we tried lots of tools, but nothing really addressed scope creep. And that's where it was actually a day I saw how stressed my co-founder actually was. And I was like, okay, we've got to do something about this. And that's where the idea for Scopey was born.
It's a fascinating challenge, isn't it? 'Cause it's one of those things that goes on in the dark. It's something that inside agency teams and professional services teams, it's obviously chatted about a lot. It's whether this client has made these changes. Everyone runs away to try and find the old dusty document that may or may not say what was in scope and what everyone agreed. So why do you think scope creep happens? Where has this problem come from? Do you think it's been a problem that's always been around in times of professional services, or something that's evolved in the modern day?
I'd say it's definitely been around for a long time. And it's funny that you mentioned looking for the old scope of work document. That happened all the time. Would be halfway through a project, the client has asked for something and everyone's trying to find the old document, which is buried in some email. It's a PDF. And the project has changed so much since, that document was created. I think that's the big issue, that the old way is just too static and too slow. And especially with creative projects, creative innovation, you need fluid and live documentation to match the nature of that type of work. And so I guess getting back to your question, scope, how does scope creep happen? We believe scope creep happens in conversation. And I think this is why no other tool has solved scope creep, because if you look at project management tools, they focus on tasks that have been approved and put into the project management tool. Scopey focuses on conversations. So we create scopes of work, but then we focus on all those new requests that come in from conversations. And a lot of the time it's just sprinkled in email threads or video calls. You've got a client on a call to a junior designer and unapproved requirements are just slipping in. And so we see Scopey as, a good analogy that I like is project management is the busy kitchen in a restaurant. There's chaos, there's flames, you've got Gordon Ramsay yelling at everyone in there, and that serves its purpose for managing tasks with your team. I think project management is great for that. Scopey is the menu that your client can choose what they'd like, they can order from, make tweaks, and then the waiter takes that order through to the busy kitchen. You do not want your client going into that busy kitchen.
You make a couple of great points there. The fluidity point's so interesting because development methodologies have changed so much over time, haven't they? I always think of my time working in London in tech, particularly at the start of my career, everything was a waterfall methodology, and that was how everything was. Your scope document was sort of enshrined like a Bible as soon as it had kind of been put down. But of course, since then we've had the development of agile methodologies, people using Kanban, sort of continuous development. And I certainly see your software fitting into that type of mindset, and that has become the default ideology in not just for development teams, I would say for businesses. Jen, is that something you're experiencing with businesses? They are like, actually, this is the software to get us away from stuffy old PDFs and into the modern age of, these scopes of work are changing quite naturally. No one should be scared of that. It doesn't have to be a difficult conversation. It can now be a conversation informed by and helped by Scopey.
Definitely. Scopey would definitely fit the more kind of agile and more modern approaches to work. And I was actually speaking to Scopey the other day with James Lutet, a project manager here in Ireland who teaches agile methodology. And he really loves Scopey because, it helps prioritize what's really important and high value to the project. And it does that by showing clients the value of out of scope work. So Scopey picks up all the change requests that happen in emails. So you can put a value on that. And then when clients actually see a value on their change requests and, new ideas and their wish list, it quickly prioritizes what's actually important. And I think that's kind of what agile project management is as well. Even if it's not always on value, it's always on effort and time. So Scopey is kind of pushing that back to the clients, asking them what's important by valuing all the out of scope work.
Yeah, and it's something lost sometimes, isn't it? I suppose some people might say that historically, sort of the value wouldn't necessarily be in the scope of work, but actually I think it's very helpful it being in there, because I think a lot of the great development companies I see are always talking about what is high value. Let's make sure that we're not spending time or wasting the majority of our time on things that we see as low value. And Scopey is certainly a system that helps you kind of work that out between you. Do you think that part of this problem with scope creep and why it is such a, as you mentioned, if it's 15% of revenue, I'm sure at some companies it's even higher than that. Do you think a part of the problem is people haven't been trained properly in adequately managing scope creep? Is that sort of an issue that you've seen from businesses?
Definitely. So it's interesting. Most agencies actually don't have dedicated project managers. So I think agencies are very good at looking much bigger than they actually are. Whereas, 85% of agencies actually have less than 5 people. But you'd be surprised because you look at the types of clients they have, which are these big, car brands, and so even those large agencies may only have 15 or 20 people, and so there are not a lot of them don't have dedicated project managers. So you've got account managers, designers who are actually managing projects and all these change requests, and I think that's why, there's not that hard pushback on, first off, having a very detailed scope of work, which is, the key, and then managing all those changes that come in, because, it can completely derail a project if you're just adding in too much. So I think Scopey helps with that because it's all about prioritization and what's important. And I think Scopey just helps people that are juggling multiple roles with managing the scope of work.
And as you say, a lot of these conversations, they kind of go on very organically, and it's usually can be at the start of a project, can be further on in a project, where at the start of a project it might be the excitement, it might be something that has triggered a new great idea, right? So very organically, I think sometimes people will think, oh, scope creep, it's always bad, but it's not always necessarily bad. I think a lot of the time it's kind of a refinement process over time of what you're doing together and making it better. And it might be over time as well, things that weren't thought about in the original meetings, and actually it's a great value add for everybody to put on at some point in the project. And with Scopey making that that so much easier without you having to format the document again, hopefully not have to go through accounts again, because I know you've got some integrations there with sort of accounting software that would help. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about the businesses that have been early adopters of Scopey and how they've been using the software, how that is transforming their project ops?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've had a lot of small to medium agencies using our kind of light version that we've just launched. And what you were just saying was actually very interesting, because scope creep is also opportunity. And, everything's so competitive right now. There's so much business development you can do with your existing clients. And that's the point of Scopey, that, you could be making at least 15% more per project with strategic upselling, charging for out of scope work, and showing your clients what else is possible. And I think, as leaders, and, your client comes to you because they've got a problem, but we're not telling them all the options and possibilities that are out there. And that's where you can use Scopey to upsell your services as well. And, while also giving your client a much better end result. And so I guess, we're seeing agencies, that's how they're using Scopey to think about those things that they were doing for free and then document them in their service library as optional services, so it's easier to upsell. We found when we were interviewing people at the in our research process, a lot of creative people find it hard to upsell because they said, they thought it was detrimental to the client relationship. And we believe by showing the client upfront what the options are, and this also includes risks to the projects and what those possible costs will be, then that's a very easy way to upsell, and Scopey's kind of doing it for you. And so we've got, creative agencies, web developers using it for those reasons. But then we've also got people like lawyers and ESG consultants, and even an insurance broker using it. So it's interesting to see how scope creep happens in different industries and how they can use Scopey to kind of, document services in their library and think about how they can, charge for out of scope work.
It's a great point, because I think naturally everyone will gravitate to, agencies constantly putting together these scopes of work back and forth, and so it's certainly going to help people there. But equally on the professional services side, I imagine since the beginning of time, scope creep has found its way into professional services just by the nature of those relationships. And I think in a lot of ways, interesting on the cultural side, as you mentioned, sort of upsell, cross-sell, those great sort of agencies and consultants, and I suppose great professional services people, are often those people who are heralded for being so good at cross-selling, upselling. As you rightly say, do you think it's it could be a bit of a cultural thing? Have you noticed, since obviously you're in Ireland now, but that's not where originally you were, do you think it's a bit of a culture thing? Are we a bit too bashful maybe across the UK and Ireland about how we approach upselling? We think it's going to somehow interfere with the current project, or it might put someone's nose out of joint. Is that the reason why we're so bad at cross-selling and upselling?
Possibly. I'm a New Zealander, so I think we're actually very similar to Irish and UK, and we're probably like people pleasers as well. We are like, oh yeah, we can do that for you, and we probably do it to ourselves a lot. We keep getting told we need to be more American when we're pitching and selling ourselves, and the Americans are very come across a lot more confident and very good at speaking and probably upselling. But I think the thing is, I actually wrote a post on this very topic this morning. You can't think of it as selling. You need to think of it as consulting, because at the end of the day, you're not trying to push products on someone just to buy them. You're actually thinking about somebody's overall business goals, and you need to think past the project and, thinking of the best ways to use their budget. And I think when you think about it like that, it's a lot easier, because you're educating your client of all the options that they have. And, they don't need to. The good thing about Scopey is you don't need to sell all of that upfront. It's a live document, so you can show options during the project. But I think that's the mindset we need to have. It's like the clients come to you because you're an expert in your field and you need to guide them. And I use the term upselling, but it's really consulting and, showing them what features would benefit this project or, and I think when you look at it like that, it's a lot easier. And clients want that too. Clients hate not knowing what's going on, and they want you to guide them. Like they don't want, if a client comes with a website, they don't want you to just build a website. They want you to solve their business problem. And so you need to give them all the options, let them know all the risks, and show them what they can get for their budget.
It's so interesting you mentioned client education in particular. I was having a chat with a friend of mine the other day who is a Google Ads manager, a very much quite a well-known one, and he likes to remind me all the time how well-known he is, Jen. But he was telling me of a situation. I like having conversations with him, not because we agree. I think we don't agree on more things than we do agree on. But he was telling me of a scenario that made me sort of made me think, which was that a client had come to him, and it was a situation where that client was leaving his agency. And he'd come to him to sort of say, okay, we're having an exit interview or a wash up. We're finishing off. No one's happy, but, everyone can come to an end with it. What would your advice be? What sort of questions should I ask the agency so that I can pass on knowledge for the next agency? And he very abruptly said to me, I sort of intervened and said, well, actually, your relationship, you as the person on the brand, but who doesn't really know how to run a Google Ads account, with a low knowledge, to that agency person who has a high knowledge running the Google Ads account, you sort of mining him for little nuggets of information is actually not a relevant conversation. It's not a conversation that's going to help you. You're not going to learn what you think you're going to learn from it. And I found that quite challenging because I come from the background, particularly from my consultancy side, of that it is your responsibility, right, to educate the client to, if they are, low level knowledge about your area, your sector, your expertise, then it is actually part of your job as being a good consultant. I imagine the great consultants do it, to educate that client and make them better at that. So scope creep doesn't happen as much, and there's more of a greater understanding of what's in the process and not in the process. Do you see elements of truth in that? Was I wrong to be so against kind of what he was saying in that sort of aspect? Is there that kind of high knowledge, low knowledge? Is that another reason why we get scope creep so often, maybe?
Yes, I think so. It's like if you get a freelancer, they're not going to guide you at all. They're going to do exactly what you've asked. But if you went to somebody that's got, a much higher rate, you're paying for that experience. You're paying for that 20 years of knowledge or, a degree in this, and someone who's done lots of these types of projects. And that's very important. And we encourage in Scopey to start productizing your time too. So somebody that does have 20 years experience, like we think you should try and get out of that whole hourly billing as well, and trying to, the reason why you can do something in an hour is because you've got all that experience. So that shouldn't just be an hourly rate there.
So Jen, how do you deal with the scope creep at Scopey? Because as a SaaS development roadmap, you have community engagement in that. So there must be lots of businesses who see the potential of your software, want to use it within their stack, perhaps pushing you in all sorts of directions now that might not be in line with your vision. How do you manage that as a business? How do you decide what should be developed next and what features and integrations should go into the platform?
This brings up a really good point, because we've also all been the scope creeper. And even with Scopey, I'm always having these ideas of how we can make things better, and my development team are just like, no. So I do it myself. But, and especially as we're testing with clients and watching how they use it, and you want to give everyone the white glove service, especially at the beginning. So we want to please everyone, and they've got all these requests and ideas. It is very important to focus on what's the problem we're solving, and that's scope creep. Because there's obviously a lot of great features we could add around, proposals or project management, but then we start turning into the tools that exist. And so the way we keep scope creep happening on Scopey is, does this help businesses stop leaking revenue to scope creep? Will this help them upsell? Will this make the scope of work clearer? So we really try and tie down all our features to, is it solving the main problem?
And the natural lifeblood in a SaaS ecosystem, of course, is the integrations and what you can integrate with quickly. Do you want to just tell us a bit about the integrations you've done so far, how you chose them, and what your approach is going to be for integrations going forward?
Definitely. So we have integrated with Xero and Asana. So that gives a lot of businesses a complete workflow. They can create scopes of work, send them to their project management tool to manage within the team once they've been approved by the client, and then send the scopes of work to their accounting software as well. So we really want Scopey to fit seamlessly within the workflows that people are using. So as we're starting with creative and tech agencies, we're looking at the project management tools they use, the accounting tools that they use, and would be looking into things like HubSpot and Salesforce in the future as well.
And I understand in the early stages of this business, you approached Enterprise Island about funding. Do you want to just tell the listeners a bit about that process, why you chose to do that, why you took that on, and what the result of that's going to be? Is there anything that you have to provide to Enterprise Island as part of that agreement?
So when I first moved to Ireland 2 years ago, Scopey was actually a side project. And I was encouraged to go speak to my local enterprise office here. So they're dotted around the country. And they told me to interview for the Enterprise Island New Frontiers program. So I did that and got into phase 2, which is 6 months. It's funded, and they help you develop the business and really gets you thinking past just the product and how can this scale? How can this become like a big business? So I did that and then got into phase 3, which was another 3 months and funding, which was great. And then that kind of set me up to apply for the Enterprise Island PSSF fund, which is 100K. And because I've done these programs, I had developed the business, because you can't just have an idea for a product. You really need to be thinking about how it's going to scale. So I applied for the pre-seed fund, and we got that, which is great. And the goal that Enterprise Island has for that is that they want to see Irish jobs created. So in 3 years, I'd like to see you have 10 Irish employees and I think it was over $1 million in revenue.
And we're very much looking forward to you hitting those numbers. That'll be a great moment. And no doubt by that phase, you'll be out of the beta that you're in now. So what do you see those next three years being for Scopey? Where are you planning to go from here? It's obviously been a really encouraging start, and you've got had some great feedback so far. So where do you think the project goes over the next 3 years, say, Jen?
Yeah. So we launched our beta version, which is now open to the public. Everyone can start using it. So we launched that a few weeks ago, which is great. We're getting good feedback. And right now we're just working with those small to mid-sized companies to refine Scopey, get all those great case studies, and then we can really put that out as part of our go-to-market strategy and, get more of those type of customers. We're also working with a few quite large agencies in the background to develop some much more larger scale features and integrate with kind of other ERP systems. So the goal is for Scopey to become something that obviously agencies use, but then for the larger agencies, they can manage all their scopes of work using Scopey, but then also all their contractors using Scopey. So we really see our goal is to get into those networks, and scopes are going out from Scopey, coming in from Scopey, and really just be the tool that is used within that world.
Yeah, and I understand that you've got a freemium model for your pricing. Do you want to just tell our listeners a little bit about how you chose those different price points and what you decided should be sort of the difference in between each tier of the pricing?
Definitely. So we want people to try it out and use it. Like, I hate nothing more than like you signing up and then you to try it out, and then you need to pay. So I believe people should be able to use it straight away and see how much value it can bring. And so as we're still in beta, the pricing is still very reflects the beta. So it's only €9 per month for a small team of 2, and only 19 per month for a team. So the pricing will be coming up as we've refined the features, and we've got some more features coming out, but it's a great time to start testing it out. And I guess the way we came to the pricing was we were comparing it to proposal software pricing and also project management software pricing. And the proposal software was actually higher. So we leaned in more towards that because we are actually a sales tool more than a project management tool. So that's kind of how we're looking at the pricing, but it's something that we're still testing with the betas and seeing where and how they get value.
Yeah, it's such an important differentiation that you make. So I think quite naturally with that question, where does Scope go from here? Some people will think, oh, I see this in my project management tool set. It's going to fit in there quite nicely. But I think it's important that you've made that distinction, because it's certainly something I found on your platform, that actually this is a sales aid tool really, and it'll also help us sort of make sure we're not losing revenue. So also an efficiency tool, Jen. Is that how you approach it when you think of it these days, in terms of if we can make it more efficient? It's such a process that needs this kind of efficiency, doesn't it?
Definitely. And, time is money, and project scopes take a long time to create. They can take hours, and, we've got that down just to a few minutes. So, that's much more exciting and innovative work that somebody could be doing. So we see Scopey as being part of a business's project ops. Tools that do everything, I don't know. I just think that they don't get used. I think you need to find the best tool for the job, and it's so easy to connect tools together now. So I see Scopey as being, what the client-facing side of project scope, selling optional services, getting approvals. Then that ties into your project management, which you use a different tool for, and then obviously ties into your accounting software.
Yeah, it seems to be a very cyclical approach, doesn't it? Because there seems to be a natural move when, say, social media came onto the scene or anything like that of, oh, I want a all singing, all dancing tool. So you get the whole bundled, inefficient bundle, right, with lots of stuff you probably don't know how to use. And then we go through these cycles, which is sometimes seems to be a sort of a 10-year unpacking, where actually everything goes back to specialisms. And I think you can see this with agencies as well, and maybe in some areas of professional services where everyone wanted to be the all singing, all dancing agency, and then suddenly they're just a PR agency again, or a specialist Google search agency. Your project tool seems to be able to do everything for all of those scenarios, but very specific in that this is the scope of work and we're getting you more money, and it's just going to be a lot easier for you to navigate than having a bulky tool that you're trying to use to do this. But actually, I've not seen many tools do this well, Jen. That must have been part of the reason why you must know this is such a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. When I was trying to use project management tools, to be honest, I think I have ADHD, and I find it hard to concentrate on anything that's too complicated. And those tools are just so feature rich and so much going on that nobody uses them. Your power users would use them, but we found that the project management tools would sign up to it. It looked great, promised everything, but they were overly complicated for what we needed. And that was a huge part of creating Scopey. And as a UX designer as well, I know what I wanted. It just needed to be so simple, like essentially a list of, yes, I want to put that over here. And we've designed it like that on purpose. So it's powerful enough to help you sell, but it's easy enough that you'll actually use, and your client as well. So we also found from our research and our prototype we had last year was, no matter how great the software is, a lot of your clients are still not going to log into it. And so that was a huge reason why we were like, oh, we actually had a big breakthrough moment there. And we were like, okay, it needs to work without the client even logging in. And a lot of people were telling us that, clients that were organizations and government type clients needed to have PDFs to sign off. So we created Scopey to work with email and PDF, and clients can sign off scopes using an electronic signature, and then it all automatically approves in Scopey. And they can also choose all their optional services within that PDF, and then that all automatically updates in Scopey as well. And then the other great thing is that the client doesn't need to log in and add tickets. All they need to do is send an email with all their changes, and it could be conversational. And Scopey picks up all those changes and puts it in a dashboard for you. Like it's just very easy to use, and that's something that we're very, very proud of, and that's the feedback we're getting too, which has been really exciting.
I think that's such a thoughtful feature, and I think your software does have a lot of thoughtful features, because I think back to times when I used to run digital departments in London, and often being the first millennial in on the digital team, my boss's first job would be, thank goodness you're here, Chris. Here is 20 logins to all these tools that now I don't have to log into, not that I was logging into them anyway or using them in the ways they were intended to work. So it's a great thing that you can pick up emails. I think the AI generation as well, I think, is really top in terms of being able to build out these scopes. And then, of course, you still need the manual editing there, but it's doing a lot of the grunt work for you, isn't it? The AI in your tool in particular, I think it really shines.
Yeah, I've seen so many AI tools that, I'm like, oh, that looks great. And I sign up to use it, and then I start using it, and whatever it produces, I can't use because it just looks too AI and too gimmicky. So we wanted Scopey to work just as well without AI. That's always been the plan. And AI should be about suggestions and just making things even faster. So we've made sure that people can still create their own scopes of work from scratch, but Scopey can give them, suggestions and make them think about optional services or services that might happen on this project. And I think the way that the AI has worked in Scopey has it's come out really well, and something that we're very proud of, and proud of the tech team, because it looks very simple, but then there's lots of like prompts in the background that are making it work like that too. And from the experience of running an agency, so if Scopey gives a suggestion of a service, also being very specific about what's included in it, but what's also not included, because scope creep can happen on just one task as well, and it just starts growing uncontrollably. So using that knowledge, that 10 years of experience, to prompt the AI to make sure that what we have is still very useful and specific for agency owners.
Whenever I see that in such a fast-paced digital world, when you're looking at someone's LinkedIn and that's the start of the post, you're like, right, this is a chat GPT. It always reminds me of those terrible adverts you'd get at the cinema before your movie, in a world where sort of situations. Yeah. So it's quite a skill in itself, isn't it? Sort of engineering the prompts in the right way to get sort of human-type answers, and certainly sort of the answers and the terminology is so important in scope creep, Jen, right? Like if you get the terminology wrong, you'll still have people who don't put their hand up, don't want to look stupid. Maybe it's a junior type person as well who is more self-conscious. And actually, scope creep can come from that, can't it? Just a misunderstanding on terminology. So it is important to get the words, and I think this is another great reason for people to use your software, that the words do matter in a scope of work, don't they? And it's important, I think, helpful for AI to sort of generate things, because it might just help you with blind spots, particularly if you're, say, a more creative or you're in those sorts of sectors where this doesn't come natural to you. You don't write this type of verbiage or this sort of formal proposal. You don't do your terms and conditions. Someone else does that for you. The terminology seems very important on this type of product, Jen. Is that how you feel about it?
Yeah, definitely. And that actually brings me into the service library and templates, because you brought up a really great point about, like a junior designer or a junior might not knowing the correct terminology. And some of the feedback we have had is that this is great for bringing team-wide consistency, because you start building your service library of services, which means anyone has that source of truth and can start putting together a scope of work themselves. And then any scope of work that you create, you can save it as templates. So anyone could open up an old template and then use that as a basis instead of starting from scratch. And it just means that more people understand your services, because first off, a lot of, if you asked some junior or even mid-level, staff members what all the services were and approximate cost, I bet they'd have no idea. So now everyone has access to that, which I think is very helpful. And it just means that people can, even if a junior was answering a client of a new request, they've got that they might have that in the library from a past project. And it just means that you can keep projects moving instead of always stopping and trying to, get quotes for things. You've got that in your service library. And I think because of that, it just speeds everything up and you've got your whole team on the same page.
Yeah, it is so helpful. I think you're absolutely right. It is helpful. That standardization as well, I think, is so important for a lot of businesses, because lots of people, as we sort of mentioned earlier, as people are often not trained in doing things like scopes of work. Often it'll be a situation of, how do you do your scopes of work here, right? And someone learning literally on the job, which is, you get a lot of kind of individuality in scopes of work, which actually can be painful and cause problems, whereas actually moving to a standardized structure like this for a scope of work, I think is very helpful. Like you say, picking up the services, keeping the same consistent terminology, so you're not flicking back saying, oh, how did we say this? Did we say something that has confused them, so they think it's in scope, we think it's out of scope? That classic that you are trying to solve. Actually having that terminology, you're going to have more confidence, aren't you, talk to the client of, this is actually definitely in scope, because we all use this system and we all know it like the back of our hand now, and the terminology that it uses means that it was certainly there. I imagine it takes away some of those awkward conversations that are naturally part of a scope creep conversation, right?
Definitely. And that's the thing, I think with the traditional method, people just put a blanket percentage for contingency. So what we encourage with Scopey is to actually don't just say 10 to 15% for contingency. Actually, value, say what the risks and other things that come up might be, and put a value on that. And because you're starting to document all of this, you can learn from past projects, and you'll know what all those things might be for this project. So I think that in itself will help prevent a lot of scope creep on projects as well.
Yeah, your point on contingency is such a good one, because of course in so many sectors contingency is of course there. It's for things that couldn't be foreseen, and in a lot of ways it's good planning to have contingency. The digital world, we still seem to be a bit scared of it, scared to talk about it. Clients always sort of raise the furrowed brow and sort of say, what's this that we've not kind of budgeted for this, there's no line items against it. Again, that's probably culturally just something we need to get better at as a business community, Jen, right? That actually contingency, again, a very natural thing. It's something that, as you quite rightly say, we need to get better at sort of saying what those contingency things might be, instead of just saying, right, blanket, 10%, right?
exactly.
actually nailing it down. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, your client's coming to you because you're the expert. So we should know what those things are.
And my great contingency, of course, as part of this podcast, is asking you what your favorite game is, which you'll know from other podcasts of the Bear Business that we do. My little extra 10% on the side is to find out what people's games are, because I think it's so revealing, fascinating what people like. What would you say your favorite game is, Jen? Is there a game you particularly like to play?
Well, I actually have a new game I like to play since moving to Ireland. So when I moved here, I got asked to join the Mothers and Others Gaelic football team. So I started playing Gaelic football, which is very fun and very full on. I can't say I was very good at kicking goals or being very accurate with that, but because I'm tall and have long arms, I'm always good at defense and getting in the way of the ball. So you'll see me at the back of the field.
Do you have family still in New Zealand? Do you tell them about it? Are they like, oh, quite like this Gaelic football? Have you piqued the interest? Are there going to be more New Zealand Gaelic football players now?
Well, yeah, so all my family are in New Zealand, but funnily enough, it's very similar to Aussie rules, which obviously everyone loves back in Melbourne. And I think a lot of Irish players actually go to Australia to play Aussie rules. But I think the difference in Gaelic is that there's just a bit more like, I don't know, Irish like to throw in a few extra skill sets. So you got to run and solo the ball, so run and bounce it on your foot and then bounce it every 4 steps. So there's a lot to it. It takes a while to get used to, but it's definitely a lot of fun.
Yeah, if you're a viewer who hasn't watched any Gaelic football, I think now is the time to go and introduce yourself on YouTube, as it's kind of an amalgamation of kind of bit of rugby, basketball, football, really, isn't it? So it's certainly going to keep you interested, and you need to have lots of skills on it. But thank you very much, Jen. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today about Scopey. I think the listeners now have such a great idea of how they can use this in their tech stack, into their project ops. And what we'll do is in the show notes, we'll put a link to your website and also on your social media so they can ask you some questions. So thank you very much for being with us today, Jen.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Really enjoyed it.